All right, there you're watching Business Nigeria again and the national broadcast to address the ongoing nationwide protest. President Bola Tinubu appealed to Nigerians to call off the action, promising that his administration was ready to listen and address the concerns of the protesters. He said the country requires all hands on deck, regardless of age, party, tribe, religion, and other divides, to work together in reshaping the country's destiny. The president's speech also highlighted key economic policies, including his administration's efforts and interventions into SMEs, transport, and agricultural productivity to enhance food security, amongst others. Let's take a listen to another aspect of that by the president.
Prices. I've directed that tariffs and other import duties should be removed on rice, wheat, maize, sorghum, and drugs. We have started the distribution of conversion kits and setting up of conversion centers across the country in conjunction with the private sector. We believe that this CNG initiative will reduce transportation costs by approximately 60% and help to curb inflation. 75,000 beneficiaries have processed to receive our 1 million micro and small business single-digit interest loans starting this month. We have also built 10 MSME hubs.
Again, the president spoke more on some direct interventions that will also impact the business community. Again, take a listen.
On the physical side, aggregate government revenue has more than doubled, hitting over 9.1 trillion naira in the first half of 2024, compared to the first half of 2023 due to our efforts at blocking leakages, introducing automation, and mobilizing funds creatively without additional burden on the people.
All right, now the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Chinyere Amona, joins me now from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you so much. It is good to have you on the program this afternoon.
Thank you, Tolu. Thanks for having me, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Yes, I know that the LCCI has been on the forefront of pushing policies, support, advising government and, bringing in ways we can address some of these challenges. But specifically on the fiscal side, the president is saying that revenue is looking good. 9.1 trillion naira for the first half of 2024. Debt servicing seems to have also reduced one way or the other. And this seems like some positives are coming out. What do you make of it, DG?
So yes, the revenue seems to have gone up. But if you compare it with last year and then check the dollarization, so what's the dollar equivalent of the revenue we have today, you realize that it hasn't really grown significantly. The president has outlined a lot of palliatives or initiatives that he wants to put on the table, and some that he said we have commenced already. But it's important to note that part of the reason for this agitation and the protest is the fact that some of these initiatives are not trickling down as they should. So there seems to be a gap between the policies that are being made and the implementation of those policies. And that's what we have always at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry talked about. And there has to be some level of transparency in some of these initiatives to be sure that it's getting to where it should get to. Because if you have this list of, and the president gave a long list when he spoke yesterday, if you have this long list of items and the people are crying of hunger and the food inflation is rising, then there is a problem, and we need to address that problem.
The problem seems to be around implementation. Is that what you think?
Yes, I think it's implementation because, one, there isn't much transparency around some of these numbers that we're banding around. Talked about the 75 billion, and some of the items on the list that the president put out yesterday, we've heard those figures before. We had them late last year. and we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen concrete items. So it's important that that gap, that implementation gap, needs to be fixed. It's important that there should be more transparency and accountability in the system to assure the private sector that something is being done.
Productivity in Nigeria's non-oil space is something that remains very important. I think in recent times we've been talking about shifting from oil to the non-oil space. In your assessment, you deal very well, so very much with the business community. What are the feelers? What feelers are you hearing in regards to how convenient is it to deal in the non-oil export space at the moment?
It's still very challenging, and for various reasons. The cost of production is high, so Nigerian products are less competitive, even locally and externally. So it's, if cost of power is high, cost of storage is high, cost of logistics is high, then even the forex and the inputs to production. So productivity is low because the cost of production is very high. And then think about the manufacturers who are struggling to make ends meet. Also have then regulatory challenges with taxation and the number of charges they face every day, and the fact that even with the policies that are being put out there doesn't seem to be any coherence, there doesn't seem to be any clarity and long-term thinking. So it just seems very short-term, and so it gives a lot of manufacturers the sense that there's an uncertainty even in investing. So if you have, we are trying to attract investment into certain sectors, if there isn't sufficient certainty about the policies in those sectors, then it's not going to move forward. Also, we talked about, and then the president, in part of what he talked about agriculture and boosting production in the agricultural space. I think that's a fantastic thing to do. That's a good initiative. However, regardless of how much you want to do in that space and how much fertilizer you give to the farmers and what you do, if you don't deal with the issue of insecurity, then you're not going anywhere, because the farmers are not able to produce their crops, and even when they produce the crops, they can't move it from farm to the market. So we need to deal with insecurity now. And all that the president said yesterday, he didn't mention anything about how he's going to deal with insecurity. That's a big piece of it.
Well, indeed. Well, I'm sure the president is not leaving that stone on top, because I just have information in that we'll be bringing. I think the president held a meeting just early hours of today, the presidential villa, with the security advisor and all service chiefs, Inspector General of Police, Controller General of Customs. Well, we'll be bringing details of that as we move on. But like you mentioned, security, it's something that is very, very important. Some also say that some analysts in some quarters are talking about this removal of tariff on some of this food stuff. They say there might be another pressure, or this might cause pressure on the foreign exchange that is still a bit scarce. I don't know if you're thinking along that line. What impact will this have? Let's assume it exceeds 180 days.
So it's a double-edged sword, right? We're in a crisis and we need to import to fill the gap. However, they're also right, because as you lower tariff, more people are going to want to import, and they're going to use the scarce forex that you have to import. So it's a double-edged sword. What we need to do is that while we say, okay, 150 days, what have we put in place in order to ensure that productivity goes up within that period? So sometimes we have these measures, give a timeline, but then nothing gets done. So when you get to the end of the 150 days, you then realize, oh my goodness, we haven't done anything, and you're likely to extend it. But then that's also your forex leaking away and your naira being threatened. So while it's a double-edged sword, and we need to get in the food supply at this time to try and moderate food inflation, we also need to do a lot on the infrastructure side to ensure that we boost production.
Let's shift to the credit corporation, looking at a credit system or a credit economy. Many say that's also the way to go, and the president is pushing for this. What do you think will be the positives of this if properly implemented, like you highlighted?
So if we are able to create a a means of getting access to credit for small businesses. Over the years, we've recommended that the CBN explore alternative policy measures that promote credit access actually, because this will stimulate investment, it will support entrepreneurship. And this could include like targeted intervention. We've talked for SMEs, you need to do help them. Rate of borrowing is so high that they can't borrow. So we need to think about concessional lending facilities, loan guarantees, or some other interest rate subsidies that can help the small businesses to grow and to establish themselves. Because remember that these are key sectors of the economy, and they operate a lot in the agricultural sector, manufacturing, and power. So we need to pay attention to how do we ensure that there's access to credit so that these sectors of the economy can thrive. We talked just now about diversification. We've been talking about diversification for a very long time. But what are we doing to ensure that these other non-oil sectors are built up? Because they're the ones that will create the job. They're the ones that can generate revenue for government if they do well and they're paying their taxes as due. And they're the ones that will ensure that there is safety and stability within the economy. What are we doing to ensure that that happens?
Interesting stuff. I talked earlier with my first guest and identified increase in fact. Of course, government revenue is on the high side at the moment, but what will be done with whatever comes to state and local government also remains very important. Now, tell us about the business community, this protest and how it's impacted. The CEO of CPP, in a statement he released sometime last week, said the nation is losing like about 400 billion naira on daily basis. Some manufacturers had to halt production because they didn't know what was going to happen. Some had to stop supplies and all of that. Please tell us more about this and what you've heard from the business community.
So from the business community standpoint, we are really interested in not having this kind of unrest. The economy is too weak to accommodate this. And I believe that with businesses over in the last couple of days that we've had this protest, we've talked about losses to business, but also talked about losses of manpower, and the time, because a lot of businesses didn't open on Thursday and Friday because of the crisis. So we're losing productive time. And if we're losing productive time in August, that means the commodities or the goods that we should have produced for September and October, there will be a challenge. And you also have, for small businesses, they always seem to be the hardest hit because you have their shops being broken into and things being stolen and even loss of life is the problem. So we kind of know that this protest, if once it is hijacked, it gets really bad.
Again, let's take our mind back to the CNG initiative of government. Because at the end of the day, most countries are shifting away from fossil fuels, trying to get cleaner fuels and all of that. And Nigeria has proven and unproven reserves of gas. And that's where government seems to be shifting focus. In that same report, or that same speech of Mr. President, he says this would drive transport costs down at about 60% and help to curb inflation. What would you also say about government's approach to this? We see some partnership with private sector trying to get points where people could recharge their cars or refill their cars with CNGs. What would you also make of this move on one hand?
So with the CNG, it's a great initiative. It's definitely cheaper than fuel, and we need to go in that direction. And one of the quick wins I hope we can get out of all of this is the quick fix, is the distribution of the million CNG kits that the president talked about at extremely low or no cost to commercial vehicles, because these are people that transport people and goods, and they currently consume about 80% of the imported PMS. So if we can convert to CNG, it will be cheaper to transport goods and services across the nation, and hopefully that can bring down the cost of food as well, because a lot of if you look at the difference between a basket of tomato in Jos and in Lagos, you can see that there's a big difference, and that's because of transport costs and all the challenges along the logistics rail. So it's important for us that CNG initiative is quickly implemented. But that also requires building infrastructure across the nation.
Indeed, infrastructure, which is not cheap. It's also very cheap to invest in. So finally, before I let you go, DG, specifically, what would the private sector or the organized business environment, what are you saying to government at the moment? Yes, you need policies that will streamline, facilitate trade. We can also, AfCFTA, we're not even talking so much about it anymore because we are yet to sort internal challenges. How do we tap into that very big market? What will you be saying specifically to government now? Like things that you think can, of course, make the environment more conducive for both small and big businesses.
Okay, so the last point I made was around infrastructure, right? So there's massive infrastructural deficits, and businesses are suffering because of this. So one of the asks would be, can we have more focus and more funds being allocated or released into infrastructural development? With the new capital expenditure component of the budget, which is about 12.2 trillion, I understand there's been a release of only about 1.8 trillion by mid-year. That's just like a drop of water compared to what is required. If we don't have the right infrastructure, businesses have to provide their own infrastructure, and that makes them not very competitive. Because as the cost of production increases, then businesses will want to, of course, pass on the cost to consumers. But remember, consumer spending is dampened during this period. So consumers are not even able to take on all that cost. You talk of AfCFTA. That's a conversation that we need to have because we need to project that we are the largest economy, or even in terms of population. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we ensure that the goods that we produce in Nigeria are competitive outside Nigeria? How do we ensure that we can match the goods coming from China? So these are the issues that we need to deal with when we think about infrastructure. But also, for exchange rate, we need to continue. I think the CBN needs to continue with its trajectory on the policies and ensure that we can bring down the exchange rate. Today, the exchange rate is about 1,600. That's like, how are manufacturers going to cope if they have inputs from abroad? So we need to pay attention to this thing, but also, like your previous speaker spoke about, food and energy. Energy security is important, so we need to deal with power. I saw there was a Bloomberg report recently that Nigeria has a woeful lack of generating capacity, and part of the energy that is produced goes to waste because the grid is so dilapidated that it breaks down every time. So we need to deal with energy. If you don't have power, you need power to power the economy. So if we don't have power, we can only talk and we won't be able to move forward.
I agree with you, DG. We need power to power the economy. That's a good way to let it rest this Monday afternoon. I must thank you so much for joining the program despite your tight schedule. Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry there, Dr. Chinyere Almona. Do enjoy the rest of your day and have a productive week.
Thank you, Tolu. Bye now.
All right there. Well, it's time to talk markets this Monday afternoon, and let's see